My name is Frank Kodek, and today, December 13th, 2013, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak with Keith Ann Stiverson, Director of the Law Library and Senior Lecturer at Chicago-Kent College of Law. Our conversation is part of the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, a component of the Spinelli Law Library Reference Shelf on Hein Online. The setting for this conversation is the conference room at the headquarters of the American Association of Law Libraries in downtown Chicago. Keith Ann, it's a pleasure for me to speak with you today about your life and career as a law librarian.
Thank you, Frank, and it's great to see you again. We really miss you here in Chicago since you've gone on to become Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, something I'd like to talk with you about sometime.
I will be more than happy to do that. I'll probably bend your ear for a long time. But anyway, for now, let's begin by learning a little bit about you personally. Can you tell us about your early life, where you were raised, your family background, and what your childhood was like?
I'll keep this kind of brief because I could go on and on. I was born in Columbus, Ohio. My parents were divorced when I was very young. And we moved to Washington, D.C. when I was about 12 years old. And my mother was very involved in politics. She worked for Senator Philip Hart of Michigan until his death. And moving to Washington really changed my focus in a lot of ways. So I had an odd name, so I was always explaining that no, don't be surprised, I'm not a boy, that kind of thing. And I was fortunate to have a very good-looking older brother, so I always had girlfriends. Even though my mom was divorced, she decided to turn Catholic after the divorce, and it was kind of strange in a way, our upbringing. We had to explain a lot about ourselves.
Very good. Well, I'm sure we're going to come back to that Washington presence and your mother's political connections there because of the work that you've done as a law librarian. So, let's a little bit more about you personally. What do you like to do when you're not working? What are some of your hobbies, passions, pursuits outside of law librarianship?
Well, I guess I'd say I'm a dabbler, and I'm interested in everything. I'm leaving Tuesday for Paris.
Oh.
I'll be gone 10 days. I love going to performances. For instance, everyone yawned when I said, oh my gosh, I saw The Great Gatsby read as a play in New York and it took 7 hours, you know, and everybody go, oh. So live performances interest me. I have a family membership at every museum in Chicago so that I can take all my friends. And lots of things like that interest me. But I really wanted to teach English literature. That was how I started out. And that kind of changed my focus a little bit.
Very good. Well, that sounds like a fascinating life, and you're probably in the perfect city in which to be able to do the kinds of things you like to do. Let's tell us a little bit about your educational and professional training, perhaps your early career aspirations. You already touched a little bit on it, but maybe you can expand just a bit.
Well, I was an indifferent student, and I think that's a very flattering way to put it. I got through high school sort of, I don't know, repairing my makeup a lot. And the thing that really changed my life was my mother worked for Oscar Chapman, a former Secretary of the Interior, and she said to him, Keith Ann's going to spend the whole summer after high school graduation going out with that guy who plays on the basketball team. What can I do? And he said, send her to Yellowstone Park. So I went to Yellowstone Park, and it changed my life completely. I remember calling my mother at the end of the season and saying, Mom, we're going to go on to Vail and work there. And she said, no, you're not. You're coming home and you're going to Rio Grande College, which is 10 miles from your grandparents. And that was in the 60s, and that was really a good place to be then. There were no distractions, and I became a good student.
Rio Grande is in?
It's 100 miles south of Columbus, Ohio,
okay,
near Gallipolis, which is where my family on both sides is from. So I was sheltered, you know. We didn't demonstrate. There was nothing to demonstrate about except the fact that we only had 3-2 beer. You know, it was...
I'm remembering, I think that's where Bevo Francis.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, our star.
Yeah, very good.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to the beginning of your professional career. I'll try not to get focused on Bevo. If I'm correct about my dates, even before completing your library degree at Catholic University in 1977, you began working in the MARC editorial division of the Library of Congress. And while at LC, you began pursuing a JD degree at Georgetown, which you completed in 1983. Can you tell us a little bit about those experiences and career choices?
I went to Catholic University, which had, for a graduate degree in library science, and they had a really good law librarianship program. There were 4 courses, and they were taught by Marlene McGurl, who was head of the American British Law Division at the Library of Congress. One of the reasons for going to Catholic is that there are a lot of federal librarians there, and if you want to work in the federal government, as I did, that's a good place to go. I really completed my degree in 1976, but I went back and took the last of the 4 law librarianship courses, and that's why I always forget and listed as 77. But you know, I knew from middle school age that I wanted to be a librarian. I was born to be a librarian. I think you might recall Cooter preference tests that they gave us in middle school, and all of mine said this person should be a librarian. So that was my #1 goal, but I wasn't from a family that had a long tradition of education. I married in 1971, and my very ambitious husband is the one who convinced me to go on to law school. And in between, I worked on a graduate degree in English literature.
I see, very interesting. After several years as an academic law librarian, reference in interlibrary loan at Georgetown, then assistant librarian at Cardozo School of Law in Georgetown, in New York City, you left the profession to become an associate at a law firm in Cincinnati. What led to that move, and how, if at all, did your experience as a practicing lawyer affect your subsequent work as a law librarian?
Well, you know, New York was very hard to leave, but it's like every law student will tell you now, debt is what made me think, you know, I've spent all this money on my law school education, maybe I need to work as a lawyer and be able to pay back my loans. And at the same time, this was after Reagan was elected. My mother moved back to Ohio, where the Democrats were rabid Democrat. And so she was working in the Ohio Supreme Court for the Chief Justice. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to be close to Mom, so I kind of looked for a job in Columbus. I ended up in Cincinnati, and the very fortunate thing about it is it was a very political law firm. We were municipal bond attorneys, so we had the joy of, I mean, I wrote all the official statements, so I could help that school district get an A rating, take them to Standard & Poor's, write a beautiful description of where they were so they could get a good rating. And that was great training for everything. But the firm was about half Republicans and half Democrats, so we could deal with county officials and city officials. And so again, it was a political job, actually, in many ways.
So in your mind at that time that you made that shift from librarianship to law, was that a hiatus, did you think, or was that, you know, I'm going, that's my direction now, I'm going to be a lawyer?
I didn't think about it that much. I was too concentrated on paying my debt back and getting that off my,
Sure.
Yeah, that was my main worry. And I really hated to leave New York. I loved the work. And Lynn Wishart, she had been head of public services at Georgetown when I was a student. And when she became director at Cardozo, I went with her. And it was so exciting and so wonderful to be in that city. And to see, you know, we knew exactly what we needed to do to make that a great library. And so it was wonderful, but living in New York is hard. It's hard. And you can't pay back your debt, live in New York, get to the opera. You know, you just can't live the life you want to live unless you're making more money. So that was why I left. It was hard to leave, though, because Lynn was a very special mentor to me, and I hated to go, frankly. And Cincinnati, after New York, was a little tough. I mean, I was divorced by then, and it was odd to be divorced in Cincinnati. It just didn't fit the culture there. But the firm was wonderful. Mm-hmm. The firm was great.
So you returned to librarianship in 1988, and you came to the Law Library of Congress as a special assistant to the law librarian, serving, I believe, under Carlton Kenyon, Kathy Price, and Rubens Medina. Right. In addition to the 8 years that you worked there, you later served on the board of the Friends of the Law Library of Congress and on the ABA Standing Committee on the Law Library of Congress. Given this long experience with that particular institution, can you reflect on its role and importance?
Well, I'd like to go at that from kind of a different direction.
Okay.
The real mentors I had at the Library of Congress were two guys who, one was Dan Mulholland, who became head of the Congressional Research Service, but at the time I went back, he was head of the Government Division. Charlie Doyle, who is still at the American Law Division of the Congressional Research Service, and he was interim law librarian when Carlton Kenyon retired. So, you know, Charlie came in and he was so focused on service to Congress, he looked around and he said, how are you spending your time here? And he saw that what we were doing was all of the prisoner letters addressed to Hall of Congress Loans and Grants Division came to the law library, and we sent them 10 free copies of something to help them out. So, of course, then we got more letters. And that's how we were spending our time. And Charlie, of course, could look at that and say, wait a minute, you're not really serving Congress here. And so he gave me 2 jobs. He said, we need to be teaching congressional staff how to use the law library reading room and how to understand legal materials. And this is a way you can serve hundreds of people who come new to the Congress every year. And we need to revive the Friends of the Law Library because James Billington, a Reagan appointee, new to the Library of Congress, was looking around and saying, we should be raising money. And so we had a very successful Friends of the Law Library group in the 30s. It had everybody, Andrew Mellon, you know, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court used to go and present our appropriation request and things like that. So we had all sorts of support. And how had we become essentially second-class citizens in this great big institution? So I spent most of my time as special assistant just looking around and saying, wait a minute, everybody needs a computer. Wait a minute, Teresa Papadimitriou needs to have a Greek database. How are we going to make that keyboard work? And it was a fabulous job. It was a great job, but the direction was very different. And then with Dan Mulholland, Dan was taken by Billington to create a team, a congressional services team from throughout the library. And I was the lucky person chosen from the law library. So 7 of us did all sorts of special things. And you'll remember Newt Gingrich was coming in then, and it was a new wave, and we had Clinton and Gore and all of this. And everybody was at war. And our job was to remind them of the central importance of the library and how they needed to support us. And it was great to work on that and to see the enthusiasm grow with the Congress. So when I look back, the law library is in much better shape now. Roberta Schaefer came, David Mao is there. It's a much different place. But at the time I went in there were 3 computers in the whole department, and they were doing foreign law research. But again, we were doing all of this prisoner letter answering, and it changed completely with Charlie and with Dan overseeing things.
Fantastic. So it
made a big difference.
Huge turnaround.
Huge turnaround.
Over that period of time.
Yeah.
Great. I neglected to ask you, but I want to take a little bit of a step backwards. So you were from New York to the law firm in Cincinnati, and then 1988 you show up back at the Law Library of Congress, leaving the practice of law, coming back into librarianship. What were the motivations? How did that come about?
Well, now that I think about it, Linda Stubbs is somebody that I worked with in Mark Editorial 100 years before, you know. And that job in Mark Editorial was very important because we were starting up the name authority file. We were taking all those beautifully handwritten cards about the history of authors and geographic names and all this, and we were making the name authority file. So it was basically a proofreading job, and I already had a professional library degree, but I wanted to work at the Library of Congress, so I took a GS7 job when you're never supposed to start below a GS9. I took a GS7, and I was a supervisor in an 11 within a couple of years. So Linda Stubbs had been my friend and co-worker, and she called me and said, did you know that there is an opening for a special assistant to the law librarian? And when I heard about it and read the job description, I thought, I was born to do this job. And so that's really why I went back. I wouldn't have known about it because I wasn't following that kind of thing.
Sure, very good. So now to catch back up, in 1996, after 8 years at the Law Library of Congress, you returned to the world of academic law libraries by becoming the Deputy Law Librarian at the Tarleton Law Library of the University of Texas. At Tarleton, you worked with one of the legends of the law library profession, Roy Mirsky. Have to ask anyone who worked with Roy, what was that like, both working with Roy and at UT generally?
Um, Roy was a force of nature, as you well know. And I was working in Washington. We had the government shutdown under Gingrich. All of that happened, and Roy was coming to town because he had an opening for his associate director, or whatever it was going to be called. And he called me himself and said, you know, someone told me I should talk with you and that we would get along well because we have similar philosophies about librarianship. And I thought, huh? And I didn't really know him. I didn't know him. I was from government, which is a whole different mindset.
Sure.
And so I remember going over to the Westlaw offices to meet with him because, of course, he borrowed an office from Westlaw to do his interviewing. And I went over to meet him, and, you know, it was, we instantly got along and understood each other. And I had worked for a number of difficult men before. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I liked the fact that he had a very high standard of service. And it was only later that I also became acquainted with the fact that all of the staff served his every need, took his cleaning, got the car fixed for him, and things like that. So here I was coming from government where you never do things like that, never. And one of the things I said to him before I started working for him is I said, you know, I come from government and I don't believe in all of this personal service stuff. And he's like, no problem. Well, of course he had 40 other people. So
didn't need you to
so my job became kind of a buffer. You know, I tried to save the staff from that kind of thing. But it was really because, you know, he had vision problems. He wasn't the best driver, and he needed that kind of help. But I have to say that I've never met anybody as absolutely sure of the value of the library and every person in it as he. And another thing that I remember well, when a staff member had some tragedy, oh, my mother has cancer and I can't come in for 3 weeks, he cared more about his staff. So when I was fishing around for Gallagher Award letters to try to get him that award, the staff, you know, if you look at those letters now, you'll see that the staff loved Roy, and he cared about every one of them. And as it ended up, he was rather like a father to me, really. So, yeah, a good fellow.
That's great. Thank you so much for that remembrance of Roy. What about UT generally? I mean, you, as you say, you've been in government, and now you're at this major law school in Texas, which at least I don't think you've mentioned anything about being south up to now.
Well, no, and that was part of the thing with meeting with Roy in the first place was to be respectful. Oh, thank you so much for calling me. I'm very flattered. Let's talk about the job. And I thought, Texas, and my mother should hear my, you know, George Bush was governor. You're what? You're thinking, what? You know, and as it turned out, I went down there and just fell in love, you know. Johnny Gimble, Lyle Lovett, barbecue, the whole thing, it just took me over. And I loved it. I loved it, and it was so different from every other experience I'd had. And it turns out that my mother ended up loving it too, and she retired down there. So she and I had 3 wonderful years when she retired, and she loved Texas. She loved everything about Texas except people coming up to the door to ask her if she had found Jesus. And I can't tell you her response because you're recording this. But I do remember, though, vividly the shock when, you know, Austin's not like the rest of Texas. I volunteered at the LBJ Library to do penance for the fact that I had never missed a moratorium marching against him when he was president. So I did my penance. He looks great now, doesn't he, compared with so many others?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where I was going with that. Oh, but it was so conservative, really. Texas is so conservative. And even Austin, Mom and I would go to every Democratic fundraiser, and there would be 5 people there. Lady Bird Johnson, Liz Carpenter, Molly Ivins, you know, and that was it. So there wasn't any hope of, you know, and George Bush was governor. I mean, I do think more highly of him now, but at the time, you just thought, the politics is nuts here, you know, so.
Okay, very good.
I probably shouldn't say that, but I can't resist either. That's the way it is there.
Keeping along, focused on the timeline, you left Texas in 2001 to become the director of the law library and senior lecturer at Chicago-Kent College of Law, the position you still hold today after more than a dozen years. So taking that whole academic experience, but especially the last years here in Chicago, what has it been like to lead a major law library into the 21st century? Tell us about the challenges and hopefully some satisfactions about being director in, as they say, interesting times.
Well, to kind of explain how I came from Texas, though, Roy never likes anyone to be around too long. That was 5 years. And, you know, he's through with you by then.
People didn't like to be around.
No. You know, my mother died, and I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And he said, you know what you're going to do? You're going to go to Chicago Kent. And I said, what? I said, frankly, I've had enough of law schools, and I won't go into all the reasons, but it seemed to me I would serve better in government, and I've always seen librarianship as, you know, we're nurses who can't stand the sight of blood. We want to help people, and I thought I could do that better in government. So to be candid, I applied for the 7th Circuit job, and I went there to interview, and I didn't get the offer anyway. I'm not sure what I would have done had I gotten the offer. But Gretchen Van Dam went there, and she went from Chicago Kent to the 7th Circuit. Right. I didn't get the job, and Roy kept saying, no, you've got to go over there and interview at Chicago Kent. I said, I don't think a law school's right for me. And then I went to Chicago Kent. The nicest people, the most collegial faculty, everybody there had ideas of service and wanted to talk about what I could do for them. And I fell in love. You know, the place is great, and it's still really collegial faculty. They're grateful for everything we do, and I had opportunities there that I think have served me well. For instance, a few years ago, I stopped supervising audiovisual. It didn't make sense anymore. It belonged with IT. Right. But what I got in return, and I didn't even realize how great it would be, is I supervised faculty support. So I could look at the group I had. I had like, I don't know, 9 people maybe, none of whom really understood that they needed to be able to burn a CD and they needed to be able to do all of these other high-tech things. Mm-hmm. Now we have, it took some years, and I had one really good person to help me, Vince Rivera, but that is a terrific group of young people who they have degrees, undergraduate degrees. Mm-hmm. They're very high tech. They know how to do everything technologically, so they can sit down with a faculty member and say, you know, why don't we publish your book this way, and why don't I send out some blurbs that way? So we do all the marketing and SSRN uploadings and everything else we can do to help market faculty scholarship, and that's been a godsend because Debbie Ginsburg, our electronic person, she works with all of them. She trains them. Mm-hmm. We're all on the same page. We're all working toward faculty scholarship and making faculty more productive, and that's always been our focus. So I think, for instance, if there were some suggestion that my library could be folded into another university library or something, I think there'd be a great deal of objection from the faculty because we work so closely together, and we really have had a lot of opportunity to serve them that maybe some others haven't had.
So there's always a lot of conversation, I think, among, or it has been the last several decades, about libraries and law librarians needing to be proactive as opposed to reactive. The traditional approach to assisting faculty in the library was to, at best, to give them current awareness and be aware of what they were doing, be there to respond when they needed research assistance. But it sounds like you're talking about being much more proactive, anticipating what their needs are going to be, and the like.
Absolutely, and
in a little bit different ways than perhaps other institutions are doing that with faculty liaison programs. This sounds like much several steps beyond that.
It is, I think, and we react well, I think, as things come up. And what's happened is we get the new model for law faculty, the JD PhD model, for instance. We know right away you can't form that collection. You know, you can't do it. You can't buy all the stuff. They don't necessarily stay as long as they used to. They are interested in everything, these JD PhD people. So the best you can do, it seems to me, is we have what we call a library technology group, and Debbie Ginsburg and the folks who work with her, that's the area that's really growing. And it's growing because we'll get a new scholar who says, I want to use Qualtrics, I don't want this other survey thing. And so somebody has to become an expert on Qualtrics and help that scholar get everything he wants out of the product. So we do a lot more product testing and things like that, so we can tell them, oh, this will work, no, that won't work for you because you want to do this. And Debbie has, Debbie pretty much invented her job. I had to convince the dean, no, this isn't a half-time job. Because remember, Chicago-Kent's a very high-tech school. There are many things they did 25 years ago that were so cutting edge. And now it's my job to explain to them, no, but the technology's here now. So we need to do it again. It's going to be easy. It's not going to be what it was before, and we're going to have better results. And Debbie has been real helpful with that.
Let's switch gears a little bit. We've heard a lot about your professional experiences and the like. It's been very interesting. But I'd like to, and you've already begun to mention some individuals, and I just would like to give you an opportunity to perhaps identify or say more about the people you've talked about, or identify some additional folks who've been important to you in your career, or perhaps just who you particularly admire in the law library profession or in related fields.
Wow, that's a long list.
It is.
I'll try to contain this. When I think of people I really admire, I think first of Morris Cohen. And the reason I think first of him is because here we were at the Law Library of Congress, and again, we're doing those prisoner letters, right? And we had a rare book and rare object collection. Things like, I think it was Justice Cardozo's writing cropper. I mean, we had all sorts of wonderful things. And Morris was the only one who knew that collection. He knew it better than anyone because he was doing the American Legal Bibliography.
Right.
And so a great scholar like him, I mean, I think of Morris as the whole package, and with a very soft voice. I think of Bob Baring, too, as a great one, the Commando Legal Research. I still laugh when I think about those things that I looked at in law school.
Yeah.
But Bob, and Bob probably wrote the ultimate descriptions of both Morris and Roy for that history of law librarianship. Terrific way in which he described both of them. I think of Lolly Gassaway as the whole package. She, like you, has gone on to other things and now has retired. But law librarianship couldn't really contain all the things she wanted to do, I guess. But she was a scholar and someone who was always serving the community that we had, and a great force for good. I think of Roy, of course, but Bob, Morris, and Lolly seem to me our scholarly branch, and that was never my way. The scholarly part of it, I want to help scholars, I don't want to be a scholar. And I think that's fine too. We have a lot of choices in law librarianship. Now, people I admire though, Lynn Wishart was a great mentor to me. I don't know that I would have become a law librarian when I did, had it not been for her noticing, oh, who's that student worker back there with an MLS who's working in cataloging and doing a flow chart for them so they'll get the procedure right. And she put me into public services. But also June Liebert. I think of June Liebert, who was our electronic resources librarian. We hired her at Texas. She's now the CIO, not the director of the law library at John Marshall. Or maybe she's law librarian and CIO. But every time they have a problem, they hand something to June, and she just has such a good, wide-ranging background that she can handle it. I think of her as the future of librarianship, and I think a lot of librarians have skills they haven't even thought about tapping, and they can solve a lot of the problems we have both economically and technologically in law schools if they'll just let themselves not be so modest and sweet, get out there and say, I can do this,
It seems to be a characteristic of many librarians, that's right.
Well, it is, and it's a strength, but it's a weakness in times like this.
Yes.
Or it can be a weakness in times like this. Also, I don't know, there's so many people I admire. Bob Oakley was just, you could call Bob and say, Bob, you don't understand. The law library is just nothing in this huge, overwhelming institution. And Bob would come over and testify about the appropriation. And he would work with the standing committee on the law library that had always existed in the ABA. And he helped to make the law library much more important in the institution, which was a struggle at times. There are too many wonderful things there. All the artifacts of our history are there. It's the nation's oldest cultural institution, really. And they're just too many other things they have to worry about for the law library to mean much. And as you know, in every institution, they wonder, what's this law library over here?
Yes.
What, yeah, why? How come it keeps growing? What's all, you know? And it was the same kind of problem in that institution.
Very good. You have served the law library profession in a variety of roles, too many really to fully list, but I do want to single out your work as the chair of two critical standing AA/LL committees, government relations and copyright. Not once, but twice chairing both of those committees. What attracts you to those two particular areas?
Well, it's kind of in the blood. I think our policy work is the most important thing we do. I mean, if we don't care about authentication of legal materials, who does? Nobody. You know, if we don't care about permanent public access to the law, who does? Nobody, because everybody thinks it's already out there. We know better. Mary Alice Bache was central to my getting the confidence, though, to chair those committees, because she was so, you know, she's a mentor too. She's somebody who looks out there to see who's working hard in this area and then helps you promote yourself and believe in yourself enough to do it. I mean, I think of her as a great mentor.
Great. And just to clarify, Mary Alice was the associate
She was government relations.
And then
Right.
government relations.
And isn't that our best lobbying job ever, that she's now superintendent of documents?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. ALL presidents have recognized your contributions, and on several occasions have presented you with a Presidential Certificate of Appreciation. In each instance, they recognize both a specific activity, such as your work on the Association's National Authentication Summit in 2007, and a long-standing commitment to information policy issues, such as you've already mentioned, authentication and preservation of legal information. The centrality of such issues seems to be an overarching theme of your professional life. You've already touched on this, but I do want to ask you more generally, how important is it for librarians to be actively engaged in these information policy matters?
Well, it takes more than a village. Everybody has to be involved. And for instance, we're trying to get the Uniform Electronic Legal Material Act become law in Illinois. And gee, I was happy that our government documents librarian at Chicago, Ken, happens to be in the same district as the chair of the committee that had the, you know, that sort of thing. They care about, you know, politics is local, and they do care about their constituents telling them what's needed. So you have to get those people that are going to be listened to by the particular member, of, be it federal or state. And that's why I think we've done a good job of that in AALL. You can always call some, I can think of people in California I can call and say, okay, have you got a statement that you use to help get it through in California? Because I need to just be sure I have all the basics in my, you know, we have a good network, a good advocacy network, and it's extremely important. Everybody has to get involved.
So you really can't rely solely
No.
on the national leadership to make this
No.
happen.
Another thing, I remember on I remember on the copyright committee, you know, things were always federal. Copyright law is federal. Yeah, it's federal, sure. Well, yeah, sure. But what about the trade agreements? And they're on the fast track, and they're moving quickly, and all of those trade agreements that are done in secret, largely by the executive branch, they have all sorts of provisions in there about intellectual property. And so I remember suddenly we realized, Sam Trosso was on the committee then, and he's a Canadian. And suddenly we realized, oh my gosh, you know, here we have not only federal law for copyright and the state stuff that keeps rearing its ugly head, but now we have to worry about international law. And Sam was smart enough to realize, here we are taking the worst aspects of our own copyright law in the United States and shoving them down the throat of Canadians and everybody else in these big trade agreements. So, you know, there's no end to the things that we need to keep our eye on if we care about information policy.
I would be horribly remiss if I didn't congratulate you on your election as ALL President-elect, Vice President President-elect, beginning this summer, 2014-2015. What does this action by your peers in electing you to this position mean to you personally?
Well, I'm thrilled
And
because I feel so energized. I think my staff is going, oh no, she's energized. But it means a lot to me, but there's also a lot to do. I mean, for instance, what sticks in my mind is that only 30% of the membership voted. And you can talk with Kate and others who know a lot about association work, and they'll say, we're the envy of all the other associations. Well, no, we've got to double that figure at least. And we have to be involved. And I said a lot of that in my statement. So I kind of thought I wouldn't get elected because we all have to be involved in this. This is our organization. And I think younger librarians are thinking, we don't really need to network the way they used to network. But you do. You're meeting your next employer at the mixer. You are learning more about such and such by going to the meeting. You know, it takes all of us. And I think we knew that much more clearly in the 80s when I'd have to call across town and say, you know, I've got a professor who needs a copy of X. And if you could send it over by messenger, of course I'll do the same for you. So we had to be charming, cajoling, working with each other all the time because we didn't have the electronic access we have now. And I think we've forgotten the basics that still get that person to fax that over to you because you've got to have it now or send it to you electronically. And I'd like to see us remember those things. I mean, that's going to be part of what I do, I hope.
That's a great segue into my next question, and I will preface it by saying I know it's way too early to, and probably even unfair to ask this question, but I will anyway. Do you have thoughts yet about the topics or initiatives you will want to pursue during your presidential term?
Well, I said a lot about that in my statement. I do think we need to do a lot more to educate our members and give them confidence. I mean, I can still remember at crucial times throughout my career, somebody has been there and said, wait a minute, you can do this. Remember you had that job over here and you did it. So just combine that here and you can do that too. I still think that we have the kind of education and the kind of minds that see organizations and refashion them in new ways, and we can help our law schools now and our law firms and every other part of the legal community that's really in peril now. And I think we can help them see the way if we just have faith in ourselves and, I hate to say it, cut that print. You know, I'm forever grateful that I'm in Chicago. We have 6 law schools. It's here somewhere, and we can find it somewhere, and a great library system. At the University of Texas, we were the big kahuna, and everybody else needed to borrow from us. So every one of us has a slightly different story and a slightly different resource, but we need to start rethinking things and trust ourselves, and I think we're going to be successful.
Great. It's not easy for today's law librarian to find the time and the institutional support to participate in professional activities. Do you have suggestions for newer law librarians about how to approach professional service in an era where do more with less is the mantra of every institution?
Well, again, it was a different time, but it never kept me from going to a meeting that somebody else didn't fund it for me. I mean, I knew I had to go. And I think one tip is, you know, if you check around at the chapters and at the national organization, there are often grants that nobody applies for, okay? My folks apply every year because I make them apply, and they invariably get them. And I will send them if I don't get the grant for them. So there are a lot of opportunities out there to get funded that people never follow up on. So it's like anything else. You make your own career and you make your own contacts, and if you go to your employer and you say, here's what I'm going to get out of the annual meeting, I've looked at the program and this and this and this and this, and I might be able to go only for one day, but would you support me? No one worth his or her salt who is a supervisor of people and is responsible for helping them develop their skills is going to say no. But you have to do the work, you know,
what about the individual, you know, ALL has traditionally been a member volunteer organization. It's looked to its members to not just be a member, but really to make the organization progress and do the work. Obviously, we have a strong headquarters staff and professional leadership there, but there's just lots of things, and you've talked a lot about it already, about the importance of members being involved. So what do you say to the new person who says, well, you know, I get it why it might be important, but geez, I just don't really have the time to devote to it because I'm being asked to do 2 jobs or you know, whatever they might say. So
well,
I'm kind of thinking about what do you say to those folks, not just about how to do it, but what you get out of it.
But everybody you meet is a potential employer or potential colleague, and you're going to be keyed into a network of other jobs, especially if you're doing 10 jobs. One of the reasons I left the Library of Congress, they were hiring contractors who didn't get benefits, and maybe 5% of the workforce then, and rising, was not the regular government employee anymore, and it was depressing. You had to do all of, you know, you had to do the calligraphy on the invitations yourself, you know, that sort of thing. But if you're going to become valuable to your employer, if you're going to progress in your career, if you're going to make more money, you have to get out there and you have to get to know people in the profession. And the way to do that is to invest in yourself, and you have to do it. I mean, there were times when I had to save money or room with 2 people, you know, be a roommate of 2 people at a conference, but I always got more out of it. And if you're working too hard and you want a different kind of job, one of the ways you're going to be able to do that is to network, and you just can't, you know, I mean, we're responsible for our own professional development, but you can invariably, I think, get an employer to at least support some of it. I still remember Roy saying, all right, I'll give you $20 a day for food, you know, something like that. And he would make all of us take a bottle of champagne for the champagne party that we had. We had to carry it there even though you weren't, you know, things like that. But he always ended up paying. He always ended up paying pretty much for people after all that bluster. He just wanted to be sure they weren't just going to go to programs, they were going to volunteer for committees. You know, if someone comes to me and says, I'm on a program, am I going to tell them, no, I'm not going to support you? Well, that would make the school look bad, you know? I mean, it's a big picture here. I think they need to see the big picture.
Very good, thank you. We're nearing the end of our time for this conversation, and it's been fascinating, but I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to touch on any topics that are important to you, which we might not have addressed yet. Is there anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
I think one thing I think we ought to remind ourselves about is that ours is basically a service profession, and that we help, for instance, we help faculty, we help students. I think in my case, we're starting to spend more time focusing on students as opposed to faculty productivity, which is in really good shape. But in all of our different libraries in the legal community, we're here to serve, and we have to be the ones, though, to toot our own horns. We have to be the ones to talk about how great so-and-so is because she did this. We have to publicize ourselves, and I think our biggest fault as a profession is that we're modest. And we can't be modest. Maybe we can't be like Roy, and I can still see him telling a room full of scholars, our librarians know more than you do about your subject areas. But you know, there's something in between saying nothing and bragging too much. And I think we need to do that. You see everybody else do it in every profession, and we need to get over our modesty and take credit for what we do well, which is a lot.
That is good advice and a great goal to shoot toward. Keith Ann Stiverson, on behalf of Pat Keogh, Michelle Wu, and Dick Spinelli, my colleagues with the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, I want to thank you for taking time from what I know is a very busy schedule, about to become much busier, if that's possible, to speak with us today about your experiences as a law librarian. Your remarks will be a valuable addition to the project and will be of interest to both current colleagues and to those who join the profession in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.